With Season 6 of Better Call Saul now announced and footage slowly being released, I wanted to make a video before the season opener discussing 5 things I'd like to see from the final 13 episodes. Not specific plot events like a happy ending for Jimmy or Nacho surviving, but more like the way in which I want certain aspects of the story to be resolved or explored. So, getting right into it, the first thing I want from Season 6 is a satisfying face off between Gus and Lalo. We have spent years with Gus Fring, so we know that he's the best player of the game. And we also know by now that Lalo is the most complete Salamanca. He's smart, he's charming, he's brutal. He's the best adversary we've seen Gus face outside of Walter White. We also know how the story is going to end, at least to some degree. Lalo will die, or at least Gus will believe he's dead, since he tells Hector in Breaking Bad that his entire family's dead after Joaquin is killed by Jesse Pinkman. Lalo doesn't strike me as someone who would accept a life of fake death and exile, so I assume he will die in season 6. It's very important that we feel like Gus and Lalo are maneuvering at a high level. In other words, I don't want to see Lalo make an absurdly idiotic mistake that ends in his death. If he's going to lose the war, I want to be thinking, that was genius by Gus, not that was stupid by Lalo. The cat and mouse game between Walter and Gus was amazing because it was like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. They could just never seem to get the better of each other, and then Walter learned what Gus's greatest vulnerability was his hatred of Hector for killing Max, and then he exploited it. When Gus finally collapsed, people weren't thinking, Gus is a fool. His reason for wanting to make Hector suffer was very understandable, but it ended up being his Achilles heel. So hopefully, when Lalo dies, it will only increase our appreciation of Gustavo Fring, who's already one of the greatest antagonists in TV history, not decrease the greatness of Lalo Salamanca, who may stand alongside him when Better Call Saul is over. Now, from Gus to his most loyal employee in Breaking Bad, Mike Ehrmantraut. Mike had a very interesting role in Season 5. His arc was less dramatic than the one in Season 4 involving Werner, but it did make his ties to Gus stronger. With that said, he's still not the Mike we see in Breaking Bad. The Mike we see in Breaking Bad is ruthless and fiercely loyal to Gus. So my second wish is that we get to see how that Mike comes to be. I'm slightly concerned that the writers may think, well, Mike has gone through enough change that his attitude in Breaking Bad makes sense. But I don't buy it quite yet. So perhaps we need a plot that involves Gus helping Mike out in some way that really inspires loyalty. And given that Mike will be Gus's greatest asset against Lalo, there are many ways they could do it. There are numerous characters and plots that need to be wrapped up, and Jimmy and Kim will be the main focus, as they should be, but hopefully Mike won't be reduced to just a fixer role, because there's clearly some transformation that needs to take place. My third wish is a return to morality by Kim. This one is probably a little more controversial given the direction of her character at the end of season 5. Now, for the first few seasons of Better Call Saul, Kim was the moral rock preventing Jimmy from going over the edge. And now that moral stability that she used to provide is fading as she becomes more and more like Saul or Giselle. Kim's arc appears like it will be built around Howard unless Lalo calls on her for some reason, so the options are really threefold for how her situation could turn out. She could recognize the effect Jimmy is having on her before she ruins Howard. She could ruin Howard and then realize her mistakes. Or she could ruin Howard, be taken to prison, and never really admit the error of her ways. I would prefer the first two options because without Kim's morality, there really isn't any heart to the show. With Breaking Bad, you had Hank, who was a deeply flawed person, but he still was a good man. That's why his death is so tragic. And even Jesse towards the end had a moral presence that balanced the tone out nicely. If we reach the midway point in season 6 and all the characters are selfish and cynical, I don't think that would have a positive effect on the story. Now, it could be that Howard ends up filling that role in a more proactive way. Maybe he tries a little bit harder to help Jimmy, although I feel like Jimmy has burnt down that bridge. I'm very curious to see how Jimmy, Kim, and Howard interact and how their arcs are influenced by each other. But whatever happens, I hope season 6 is a proactive moral force. My fourth wish is that we get entire episodes dedicated to Gene. We will certainly open season 6 with Gene, but when and how often we see him after that point remains unknown. There is still so much to explore in the pre Breaking Bad timeline, but we do have 13 episodes this season, so maybe the additional 3 could be solely with Gene. The prequel storyline has its limitations because it has to comply with Breaking Bad history, but with Gene, they can do whatever they like. and I'm excited to see how they handle the tone of these episodes if they do in fact happen. They could make it a high intensity final flee from the authorities, or it could be more somber and self reflective. Or they could strike a balance, which would probably be the best. Now, I would bet a large sum of money, if I had a large sum of money, that Kim will enter Jean's purgatory at some point, which would be incredible. A happy ending doesn't seem likely or justified, but I could envision a hopeful one. Something La La Land esque, like communication through the eyes. I would love something like that. But whatever ending Jean gets, happy or sad, I just hope we get more than cold opens. And my final wish for Better Call Saul Season 6 is that it not only closes the chapter on Jimmy and Kim, but I want it to find a way to wrap up the entire overarching story of the Breaking Bad world, and we need to find a new name for that world since Better Call Saul will actually end up with one more episode. In all likelihood, this is the end of the story. And although I usually don't like when sequels and prequels are overly reliant on their parent stories, for instance, Marvel movies do a lot of winking and nodding that I think is unnecessary, but in this case, I would like some acknowledgement of Breaking Bad and its thematic connections to Better Call Saul. The opportunity to do this will be most glaring in the Gene timeline. Jimmy McGill saw Walter's entire transformation. He saw him start as a seemingly reluctant, paranoid meth cook to an arrogant, murderous kingpin who destroyed the lives of almost everyone around him, including his own. It'd be cool if we saw Gene be reminded of an aspect of Walt's life and use that reminder to make a major decision. When Better Call Saul concludes, the question will have to be asked, what was the moral of these stories? And ultimately, the moral of the story runs through Walter White and Jimmy McGill and why they chose criminality and selfishness over the inverse. Although Walter was a complicated character and we see little from his early life, we have a fairly complete understanding of why he became Heisenberg, and Season 6 will give us a complete understanding of Jimmy's transformation into Saul. When Jimmy's arc is all out on the table, it'd be incredible if the writers could display the parallels to Walter White in a way that thematically concludes the entire world. Now, this would have to be done in a subtle manner. Bringing Bryan Cranston back for a flashback conversation with Saul might even be a little too much. Symbolism would probably be sufficient. There isn't one way to do this, but I think it is essential for solidifying the overarching narrative. Alright, guys, those are the 5 items on my Better Call Saul wish list. If there are any plot points you'd like to see or thematic aspects of the story you'd like to be developed, let me know in the comments below. The characters and stories of the Breaking Bad world are some of my favorite in modern entertainment, so I will be making a reaction video for every episode of Season 6 and a complete breakdown of its conclusion. So if that interests you, definitely subscribe and be on the lookout for content when the season begins in April. And if you've made it to this point, thank you so much for stopping by. Have a fantastic rest of your day. I will talk to you soon.